He walked into a room expecting to become untouchable. Minutes later, he was dead. Not in a shootout, not in a street war, not even in a fight. Executed. And everyone thinks they know why. They think it was Billy Bats. They think it was revenge. They think it was payback for insulting a made man. That's the movie version. That's the clean version. The truth is colder. Tommy DeSimone wasn't killed primarily for Billy Bats. Billy Bats was the excuse. Tommy was executed because he became structurally dangerous, uncontrollable, politically radioactive, impossible to protect. And in organized crime, when you become too expensive to protect, you don't get disciplined, you get removed. This is what most people misunderstand about Tommy's death. They see a hot-headed psychopath who finally pushed too far, a reckless killer who got what was coming. But that framing misses the real mechanism. Tommy didn't die because he was crazy. He died because he disrupted the structure. And once that happened, the decision was already made. To understand why, you have to go back to who Tommy DeSimone really was. He wasn't just a trigger man. He wasn't just comic relief with a short fuse. He wasn't just Joe Pesci playing explosive. Tommy was a high-performing asset inside Jimmy Burke's crew. Young, violent, fearless, useful. He grew up around the life, street kid, small jobs, escalation. He gravitated toward Burke early, and Burke saw something in him. Not loyalty, not discipline, but aggression without hesitation. Tommy could do things others hesitated to do. He could pull the trigger without blinking. He could intimidate. He could enforce. And for a while, that made him invaluable. But here's what everyone misses. Tommy didn't operate inside Mafia structure. He wasn't a made man. He wasn't even eligible. His crew was connected to the Lucchese family. Billy Bats was a made member of the Gambino family. That distinction matters. Because once you kill a made man without permission, it's not a personal issue. It becomes political. And politics in organized crime is more lethal than violence. The Bats incident wasn't random. It wasn't a spontaneous bar fight that spiraled. Tommy humiliated him first. That's important. Public disrespect, ego clash, old prison stories used as leverage, and then escalation. But here's the part that changes everything. Even after Billy Bats was killed, Tommy wasn't immediately executed. Think about that. If this was simple revenge, if this was clean retaliation, he would have been dead within days. He wasn't. Because at that point, he was still useful. The Lufthansa heist was being planned, millions on the line. Tommy was muscle, enforcement, insurance. You don't eliminate an asset mid-operation unless you have to. So what changed? The truth is, Bats was only the first line crossed. Tommy didn't calm down after that. He escalated. He killed again and again. He shot Spider over a joke. Impulsive, public, witnessed. That wasn't just violence. That was unpredictability. And unpredictability creates exposure. But that still wasn't the real problem. The real problem was reputation. Once word spread that Tommy had killed a made Gambino soldier, something shifted. He wasn't just reckless, he was now a political liability. The Gambino family wanted satisfaction, and Jimmy Burke couldn't ignore that pressure forever. Here's where the structure becomes clear. Burke wasn't a boss, he was an associate running crews under the Lucchese umbrella. He operated because families tolerated him. Once you start provoking other families, that tolerance evaporates, and Tommy kept provoking. There's a reason the maid ceremony was scheduled, and there's a reason it was fake. But that comes later. First, understand the math. Jimmy Burke had just orchestrated the Lufthansa heist, the largest cash robbery in American history. Millions stolen, federal pressure building, crew members spending recklessly, FBI watching. And in the middle of that environment, he has a volatile associate who killed a made Gambino soldier. That's not heat, that's nuclear. And here's what everyone gets wrong. Tommy being made wasn't a reward, it was bait.
But we'll get to that. First, understand the politics. Killing a made man without permission requires compensation, sometimes money, sometimes blood. And the Gambinos wanted blood.
Burke had two options: protect Tommy and risk inter-family war, or give him up. Now ask yourself something. At that stage, post-Lufthansa, with the FBI circling and bodies already dropping connected to the heist, could Burke afford another political problem? He couldn't. And that's where the cost-benefit analysis begins. Tommy was useful, but he was volatile. He earned, but he created enemies. He was fearless, but he had no brakes. And in organized crime, brakes matter more than courage. Here's the deeper layer. Tommy wasn't just violent, he was unstable. He enjoyed humiliation. He escalated minor slights into lethal encounters. That makes you dangerous, not to rivals, to your own crew, because now your crew has to constantly manage you. Constant management equals constant risk. The moment Tommy shot Spider, something crystallized. It wasn't just that he killed a kid over pride. It was that he did it in front of witnesses, crew members, associates, people who could talk. Now multiply that pattern. If he killed again, if he provoked another family, if he acted out under pressure, Jimmy would have to answer for it. And that's where the real shift happened. Tommy stopped being an asset. He became a structural instability. And in Mafia logic, instability is eliminated. But here's what makes it chilling. The decision likely wasn't emotional. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge for bats. It was strategic alignment. The Gambino family wanted him. The Lucchese leadership didn't want conflict. Jimmy needed peace. The math lined up. And once the math lines up in organized crime, the outcome is inevitable. The ceremony was scheduled. Tommy was told he was getting made. Think about that. After killing a made man, after multiple reckless acts, after political tension building, he believed he was being elevated. But that wasn't promotion. That was positioning. He was already dead. The moment he believed he was safe, it was over. Now, pause. Why tell him he's being made? Why not just kill him quietly? Because structure demands optics. If he disappeared suddenly, questions arise. If he's called to a ceremony, it's controlled. It looks procedural. It looks advancement. But it was a corridor to execution. He walked into that room expecting elevation. Instead, he was shot in the face. No ceremony, no induction, just removal. And here's the part most people never think about. Burke likely knew beforehand. He had to. You don't hand over an associate without coordination. You don't send someone to a ceremony without knowing the outcome.
So the real question becomes, when did Jimmy decide? Was it after Bats? After Spider? After Gambino pressure mounted? Or before Lufthansa was even complete? Because here's the uncomfortable possibility. Tommy may have been marked the moment he killed Billy Bats, not because of emotion, but because of political inevitability. Once that line was crossed, there was no version of events where he survived long-term. He might have had weeks, months, but structurally, he was finished. And that's the difference between cinema and crime. Cinema tells you he died for revenge. Crime tells you he died for balance. Families protect hierarchy. They protect order. They protect agreements. Tommy violated all three. And violations at that level don't get forgiven. They get neutralized. Now consider Jimmy Burke's perspective. Protecting Tommy means challenging the Gambinos. Challenging the Gambinos means risking retaliation. Retaliation means heat. Heat means attention. Attention means investigation. Investigation means prison. Is one volatile associate worth that? No, especially not one who keeps escalating. Burke didn't need to hate Tommy. He just needed to calculate him. And once the calculation was done, the answer was obvious. Remove the problem, stabilize relations, continue operations. That's how the mob actually works. Not through temper, through math. And that's why Billy Bats wasn't the real reason.
Bats was the trigger. Tommy's instability was the cause. His exposure was the threat. His politics were the liability. And liabilities don't get second chances. They get invitations. He thought he was walking into power. He was walking into alignment. The structure correcting itself. And once that correction begins, nothing stops it. The Mafia doesn't eliminate people because they're crazy. It eliminates them because they disrupt equilibrium. Tommy DeSimone disrupted equilibrium, so he was erased. And the moment he stepped into that room, smiling, believing he had finally made it, he wasn't being rewarded, he was being balanced. That's the real reason he was executed. Balance in organized crime isn't emotional, it's structural. And once someone becomes structurally expensive, sentiment doesn't matter. Tommy DeSimone had become expensive. Not financially, politically, psychologically, operationally. Billy Bats was the spark, but the fire had already started. Let's rewind the tension. After Bats was killed, there was a window, a quiet one. No immediate retaliation, no instant execution. That silence misleads people. They assume if nothing happened right away, it must not have mattered that much. That's not how mob politics works. Retaliation isn't impulsive, it's negotiated. When a made Gambino soldier disappears, questions move upward. Quiet conversations happen between captains. Messages get passed. And those messages don't say, "We're angry." They say, "This has to be addressed." Addressed means balanced. Balanced usually means blood. But timing matters. Because at that same moment, Jimmy Burke's crew was planning Lufthansa. Millions on the line, months of preparation, inside contacts, surveillance patterns, timing windows. You don't ignite a war during preparation for the largest cash robbery in American history. So tension was deferred, not erased. Deferred. That's important. Tommy likely interpreted that delay as safety. He wasn't killed immediately. He kept earning. He kept operating, which reinforced a dangerous illusion. He believed he was protected. But protection in that world isn't permanent. It's conditional. And the condition was profitability. As long as Lufthansa was pending, he had value. But after December 11, 1978, once the money was secured, something changed. The crew was rich, the operation was complete, now the liabilities had to be reviewed. And the review wasn't just about who knew too much, it was about who created political friction. This is where Tommy's pattern becomes lethal. Billy Bats wasn't his only act of escalation. He had a reputation for volatility long before that night. Unpredictable violence, public humiliation tactics, ego-driven confrontations. In isolation, those traits make you feared. In structure, they make you dangerous. Because structure depends on predictability, hierarchy, permission. Tommy respected none of that. He killed without clearance, he shot without consensus, he reacted without calculation. And while that made him effective in street-level intimidation, it made him impossible at the political level. Once Lufthansa hit headlines, the heat intensified. Federal pressure expanded. Burke began eliminating potential witnesses, one by one. Bodies surfaced. This wasn't chaos, it was containment. Now, ask yourself something. If Burke was systematically eliminating anyone who created exposure after Lufthansa,
would he ignore someone who had triggered interfamily tension with the Gambinos? Of course not. Tommy wasn't just a violent associate anymore. He was a reminder. Every time his name surfaced, it resurfaced Billy Bats. Every time he appeared, he represented unresolved blood. And unresolved blood festers. The Gambino family couldn't allow the perception that killing one of their made men went unanswered. Perception is power. If they did nothing, they looked weak. If they looked weak, hierarchy erodes. So pressure mounted, quietly. And here's the critical shift. Tommy thought the made conversation meant forgiveness. It meant negotiation. It meant validation. But that's not what it meant. It meant logistics.
When someone is being made, the meeting location is controlled. Participants are limited. Weapons are present. No suspicion, no resistance. It's the cleanest setup possible. You don't need a chase. You don't need deception beyond the invitation. He walks in willingly, smiling. That's operational elegance. And here's the part most people never consider. The ceremony being scheduled suggests the decision was already approved. You don't fake a making ceremony without higher-level coordination. That means leadership alignment, which means the Lucchese side had accepted the outcome, which means Burke wasn't fighting to save him. He wasn't negotiating. He was complying, because compliance maintained stability. Now zoom in on Tommy's psychology. He wanted to be made desperately. It represented legitimacy, security, status. He wasn't Italian on both sides, which already made it unlikely, but ambition blinds. He saw the invitation as a rival, not trap, and that ambition sealed him. Because the moment he believed he was ascending, he lowered his guard completely. He wasn't armed for suspicion. He was dressed for elevation. That's the difference between movie logic and structural logic. The movie frames his death as revenge, a delayed emotional response to bats. Reality frames it as political settlement, strategic sacrifice. There's a chilling possibility here. Tommy may have been told about the ceremony only after internal agreements were finalized, meaning his fate was sealed before he even knew the date. That's how mob structure works. You're alive until the paperwork is done. Then you're a meeting. Then you're a body. But here's the deeper layer. Tommy wasn't just killed to satisfy the Gambinos. He was killed to prevent future instability. Because ask yourself, if he survived bats, what stopped him from killing again? What stopped him from provoking another family? What stopped him from escalating under pressure? Nothing. And that unpredictability multiplies over time. Burke wasn't evaluating Tommy's past. He was evaluating his trajectory, and the trajectory pointed toward catastrophe. You don't wait for catastrophe in organized crime. You remove its source. Now consider the cost. Keeping Tommy alive meant continued political tension with the Gambinos, ongoing risk of impulsive violence, additional scrutiny during an already heated federal investigation, uncontrolled behavior inside the crew. Eliminating Tommy meant restoring interfamily balance, reducing unpredictability, demonstrating structural respect, preventing future exposure. The equation is simple, and once the equation is simple, emotion disappears. This is where the misunderstanding lives. People assume mob killings are emotional. They aren't. They are administrative. Tommy wasn't executed because someone was angry. He was executed because leadership determined he was incompatible with long-term stability. He violated too many invisible rules. He humiliated publicly. He killed without sanction. He created diplomatic fallout. And he couldn't be disciplined, because discipline requires self-control. Tommy had none. The ceremony wasn't about celebration. It was about containment. And when he entered that house, thinking he was stepping into permanence, he was stepping into correction. One shot, maybe two, immediate, clinical, no speech, no explanation, because explanations are unnecessary once the decision is final. And here's the most unsettling possibility. Tommy may have known weeks in advance. He may have watched Tommy celebrate, laugh, spend, plan, all while knowing the invitation would come. That's not rage. That's structure. That's alignment with survival over loyalty. And that's why the Billy Bats narrative is incomplete. Bats was the justification that made the execution acceptable, but the real reason was cumulative instability. Tommy crossed too many lines, and more importantly, he showed no capacity to stop crossing them.
In that world, redemption isn't earned, it's assessed. And the assessment on Tommy came back negative. He wasn't just a killer, he was an accelerating variable. And accelerating variables are neutralized before they destabilize the system. He thought he was being made, but he was being measured. measured against political cost, measured against structural risk, measured against future volatility. And when the measurement was done, he didn't pass. The Mafia doesn't promote chaos, it deletes it. Tommy DeSimone didn't die because of one mistake. He died because he became a pattern. And patterns are easier to eliminate than incidents. After Lufthansa, everything intensified. The money was massive. The headlines were national. The FBI pressure was relentless. Burke started tightening the circle. Loose ends disappeared. Associates who flashed cash too openly. Drivers who talked too freely. Participants who couldn't handle sudden wealth. Bodies surfaced in cars, in dumpsters, in shallow graves. That wasn't paranoia, that was damage control. And inside that tightening circle stood Tommy, still volatile, still loud, still unpredictable. Now layer this in. The Gambino family wasn't asking emotionally, they were signaling structurally. A made man had been killed. If that goes unanswered, authority erodes. If authority erodes, challenges increase. If challenges increase, leadership weakens. So the request wasn't revenge, it was correction. Correction restores order. But here's what most people miss. The Lufthansa side didn't want internal war either. They had just pulled off the largest cash robbery in American history. The last thing they needed was a feud. So cooperation was easier than confrontation. Which means once the Gambinos pressed the issue, Tommy's survival probability collapsed. He was already politically radioactive, but that wasn't the only layer. Look at Tommy's psychology near the end. He was escalating. More reckless robberies, more aggressive behavior, more public intimidation, almost as if he believed success insulated him. That's a common criminal delusion. Short-term victories feel like long-term immunity, but immunity in organized crime doesn't come from performance, it comes from obedience. Tommy performed, he did not obey, and that distinction sealed him. There's another uncomfortable truth here. Burke didn't just tolerate Tommy's volatility, he used it. Tommy was useful muscle. He handled enforcement. He intimidated debtors. He executed violence cleanly. But once enforcement becomes unpredictable, it stops being an asset. It becomes exposure. Imagine being Burke. You're sitting on millions from Lufthansa. Federal agents are flipping informants. Phones are being tapped. Surveillance is active. And one of your top enforcers has a reputation for killing made men without permission. That's not strength, that's liability. Now consider timing. Tommy was called to what he believed was his making ceremony in early 1979, months after Bats, months after Lufthansa, long enough for political discussions to settle, long enough for internal cleanup to finish, long enough for the decision to feel administrative. He likely drove there confident, maybe even relieved, because being made would change everything. Protection, status, formal recognition. He would no longer be just an associate. He would be untouchable without permission. But here's the brutal irony. That same rule worked in reverse. You don't kill a made guy without approval. So if he were truly about to be made, that would remove the ability to eliminate him easily later, which means the window to execute him cleanly was closing. That ceremony wasn't elevation, it was timing. The perfect intersection of political agreement and operational opportunity. Once he stepped inside, it ended quickly. Accounts vary, but the structure doesn't. He was shot immediately. No ceremony, no oath, just finality. And his body was never publicly recovered, because permanence matters. Now step back. Why does the Billy Bats story dominate public memory? Because it's simple. You kill a made guy, you get killed. Clean moral symmetry. But organized crime isn't moral, it's strategic. Bats made Tommy vulnerable. Lufthansa made him expensive. His personality made him uncontrollable. The political pressure made him unsustainable. And Burke's survival instinct made him expendable. All of those forces converged, not in a moment, but over months. And when convergence happens in that world, the outcome is quiet and irreversible. Here's something even darker. Tommy may have believed until the last second that Burke was protecting him, that loyalty outweighed politics, that earnings outweighed tension, that friendship outweighed structure. But the Mafia doesn't operate on friendship, it operates on equilibrium. And Tommy disrupted equilibrium. Too loud, too violent, too independent. He forced leadership to make a choice between one volatile soldier and inter-family stability. That choice isn't complicated. One man versus the structure. Structure wins every time. And here's the coldest part. Once the decision was finalized, Tommy was already dead. He just didn't know the date. That's how organized crime works at scale. You're alive until you become inconvenient. Then you're scheduled. There's no dramatic speech, no confrontation, just logistics. Location secured, shooter assigned, exit controlled. Done. Tommy DeSimone wasn't executed because of Billy Bats. He was executed because he became mathematically inefficient. His violence created political debt. His ambition created vulnerability. His unpredictability created long-term risk, and his usefulness expired. Goodfellas gives you a revenge arc. Reality gives you administrative removal. The movie shows anger. The truth shows accounting. The Mafia doesn't ask whether you're brave or feared or charismatic. It asks one question: are you stable? Tommy wasn't, and instability in a criminal hierarchy spreads, so it gets cut out. That's the real reason he was executed, not because of one insult in a bar, not because of one night in 1970, but because by 1979 he represented a future problem that leadership refused to inherit. He wasn't punished, he was neutralized, and in organized crime, there's a difference. The Mafia doesn't kill for emotion, it kills for equilibrium. And when equilibrium is threatened, it corrects the imbalance permanently.